Well, welcome back to our conversation about mental health. We've worked through some really important topics, and we're probably going to come now to what I think is the most challenging topic of the week, which is sexuality and gender. And I think one of the reasons this is a really challenging topic is because the biblical worldview is increasingly coming in conflict with our cultural view of the world. And so we want to handle this topic very carefully, very biblically. But I just want to say from the very beginning, if there are issues that come up in this discussion that you want further clarification on, if you want somebody to talk with you about, if there's something that comes up in this conversation you want help on, we stand ready as a church to help you directly. There are resources out there through Metroplex Counseling that we want to connect you to, but we think this is an incredibly important topic, and we're really glad to have it. Kyle, I want to start just by talking about your practice and what are some of the common forms of confusion or problems around sexuality and gender that you're seeing in our culture.
Yeah, I would say that, in a biblical counseling practice, you're going to see all the same things that are going on within the culture, the same conversations taking place, whether that be homosexuality, straight, gay, lesbian, the LGBTQI plus, all of those kinds of conversations are taking place because that's what's taking place in people's families. That's what's taking place, in the home, in the school, all around our culture, because the culture is increasingly talking about and looking at, I would say, discipling us in the worldview that they seem to want to embrace. And so the church then has a worldview and a discipling process. And like you mentioned, those two things can often, not just this topic, but on many topics, be at odds with. And there are often inconsistencies in the way the church presents its message or the church lives out its message, so that the world is looking, going, well, that doesn't seem consistent, and how are you? So there's confusion about how our message is seen, as well as how our message is presented. And then you have another generation, we're always just one generation away from true biblical understanding and theology. Because if we as parents don't teach it to our children, then it can easily be lost. Now, the real truth is God's not ever going to lose his theological hold on his children.
Right.
So he doesn't necessarily need us to disciple, because the trees, the nature, it's all gives glory to him and testifies to him.
Right.
So he's going to continue to be seen and be known and be worshipped. But all of those topics are coming up within our practice at Metroplex Counseling and in biblical counseling centers all across.
Yeah, and I think this is an issue, especially for parents. If parents watching this that have kids in your home, this is an issue they're dealing with. It's very possible, especially for your teenager, older teenager, that they have friends that identify as a lesbian or as gay or bisexual. And I just want to clear the field and just say we believe very clearly that God's made two genders, that's male and female, and that we believe sexuality is meant to happen between those two people in the covenant of marriage. Those are our convictions. Those are our beliefs, not just because they're right, but we do think they're right. It's because we think that's what's best for people. That's when they function best. That's our belief. That's our hope. Kyle, we're seeing this becoming increasing an issue. This is what culture largely believed for a long time. It's changing. Why is this conflict increasingly? Here's our position. This is what I just outlined. You talked about some of the confusion that's there. Why is this clash continuing to grow in our society?
Well, I think there's two big things, and that's one, I talked about the discipling that's taking place. Our culture has media and music, and if you look at the number of hours that you spend consuming media and culture versus the hours you spend in the Word of God consuming truth, even my daughter's recently, she thought it was kind of funny, but she was like, oh, look at how much music I've listened to, how many hours. Because Spotify gives you your year-end summary.
Yes.
And it's like, wow, like almost 2 months of your life. Like if you just sat down and said, I'm just going to take a 2-month vacation from everything else and I'm going to listen to music, you'd say, no way. But when you do it so many minutes every day, it's like do you even sleep that much? And but you are being discipled by the culture of the world. We swim in that sea, we breathe
sure.
that water. And so I think parents, kids, of course, education, teachers, our kids are being educated in a culture. And so it's increasingly influential.
Right.
And so as holding to a biblical worldview, I think one of the things that we have to have in place is compassion. That there is, I think that's where we want to hold on to our beliefs, but we don't want to hold on to compassion. And so as a parent, being able to sit down with someone who is kind of looking at how they feel, what they desire, what's going on with them, and they don't want to talk about it if they're not going to receive compassion, if they're not going to have it. So they're going to go towards the culture that is most valuing of who they are. And it's sad to me when the church doesn't say we're the most valuable voice, that we offer the most compassionate place.
And the compassion a lot of times revolves around the fact that these are people that are being discipled. They're being shaped and molded in ways. And I think when we just stiff arm people and don't show compassion or love for them, we're mitigating or not really fully understanding the depth of discipleship that's actually happening. It's deep from the media they consume to what, and even the heroes and the people that are put forward to them, they're now more and more. I saw another movie star this past week that just transitioned to a new gender. Those people are being held up in front of them. So especially with young people, I think it's dangerous to push them away, because when we do that, we're pushing them right into the arms of people that are affirming and encouraging that. So that rise is a challenge that we're facing culturally, the culture discipling them. But practically, just for a second, talk to our parents. You got parents out there. In a previous session, we talked about how much culture's changed, that this is a totally new ball game. How would you counsel a parent who is dealing with a child that says, I'm gay, or I'm a girl and I'm feeling sexually attracted to other girls? How would you counsel parents that are dealing with those kind of issues in their homes?
That's a hard answer to give, because each child and what they're bringing to the conversation is going to be so nuanced and so unique.
Right.
Their perceptions, their worldview, the things that shape it, where they've got that from, is all going to be different, because each home context is very different. So it's hard to give a point blank advice to a parent.
Okay.
So I think I would probably, can I respond with compassion? Can I not be freaked out with fear? Can I make sure I don't shame or blame or criticize? Because again, back to our earlier discussion on grief, most parents kind of come into this expectation, if they've been raised in a biblical worldview, that my kid will behave and think and feel a certain way. And I have this, from the time that they're born, I map out their life plan and who they're going to marry and when they're, what college they're going to go to, what career path they might have, and, what sports they're going to play. And so when a kid comes up and says, well, that's your dream, it's not mine. The grief that starts, the denial, the bargaining, the anger, the depression, all of that parent. So when a kid comes to a parent and says, I feel this, I am this, I believe this, well, grief hits like a rock, and it weights them down. So it's hard to respond appropriately.
Right.
Because at some level, they've not prepared for that at all. That's not been anything they've ever thought, well, if my kid ever, it's becoming more common that parents prepare for that, because, again, the world's discipling them that this could happen to you. So be prepared to embrace it.
Right.
And so having a very discipled theological response that says, I'm in your life for the long haul. You are my child. I am your parent. So we're going to do life together in a way that is loving, and to continue to disciple that heart in a way that is loving. So it's, again, not just a sexual issue, but how do we call our children into a biblical worldview with the kindness of God, the compassion of God, the love of God, so that they would want to follow that and live that out, and not be discipled by a culture,
right,
but embrace a biblical worldview.
Right.
and what that looks like for them, because it's going to look different for it looks different for you, me, anybody out there listening.
Right.
And so when your child comes to you, I've got to listen and hear and say, what are they saying, and how do I help them see where they are and where the Bible, the theology of who God is in their life.
And so what you're saying is there's not just one verse. Every parent can just slap on the kid and say, go memorize this verse and all your problems are going to go away.
Nope, you can't just pray it away.
There's a heart connection
Yep.
that you want parents to establish, through which that connection gives them the opportunity. We're not saying the Bible shouldn't show up. We're just saying it's across that connection of compassion and love that you can speak the truth of the gospel. You can speak a biblical worldview. And so that's what I want to say to parents. I think one of the mistakes you can make is a lack of compassion. Another mistake you can make is just not to speak the truth.
Yeah.
I'm going to love you. I'm going to accept you. And I never communicate the truth. And I just want to say to parents very clearly, we're not just telling kids to embrace biblical sexuality because it's right and it's true. We've got to help them see that the truth is actually good for them, that it's beautiful for them, that there's something that's actually helpful to them, attractive to them. And so I really want to encourage our parents that are listening and watching this. I know there are some out there that are wrestling through this issue. Don't respond without compassion, but don't respond without truth either. Anything else you want to add about the parent side before we move on to one more thing?
Well, I think it would go back into as a parent, trying to then equip yourself to biblically respond. So whether that's coming to Metroplex Counseling.
Right.
I know if in the DFW area, there's a ministry called Living Hope in First Baptist Arlington, I think is where they're housed out of, but they have a parent group. They have resources that can help think biblically and look at this because really it's like, are we responding well?
Right.
To this issue. It's not so much about my kid and getting them to respond right. It's also, am I responding right?
So there's actually a whole level of counseling and training that parents need for how to respond to that.
Yes. And so I would say, if you're not equipped to deal with that, then get equipped.
Right.
Pull people around you that can pray for you and love you and help you respond with the love of Christ, with the compassion of Christ. And it's his kindness that leads us to repentance on any issue.
Right.
The other thing I would say to parents is make sure that that this isn't just your only hot button. You know, like there's other things that your kids can choose that are destructive, and you know, like we need to be discipling them in those areas as well. And
there's a tendency sometimes just to wait till the fire breaks out. I'm going to disciple.
Yeah.
Versus a more integrated, holistic approach of trying to train and guide your children. I think that's a really good point. Really good point. All right, let's finish with this. So if somebody's watching this who says, I'm not a parent, I'm a teenager, and I think I'm attracted to girls, and I'm a girl, or I think I'm a man trapped in a woman's body. How would you counsel a teenager or somebody who's watching this who's experiencing those kind of feelings?
First off, I think I would affirm that they are loved by God. I would want to make sure that person, because I think there may be lots of questions in their mind. There may not be. They may be already feeling very confident and not feeling the shame of that. But I doubt it, swimming in the cultural soup of America, that shame is just such a part of it. And so I would want to make sure that they can be heard and know that they're valued and that they're loved. And I also know that among teens, the suicide rate goes way up for kids who struggle with any of those feelings. So I want to make sure that they're safe and that they know they're valued and that they're loved and that their life is important. And so those are some of the places that I'd want to make sure that they don't want to hurt themselves, that they're not so angry with themselves over the struggle, depending on where they are in how they're processing what they are believing and what they feel, because I think that's where they don't want to talk about it, and there's not a safe place to talk about it. So I think that's probably some of the first things I would do is making sure I check in with them that they're not going to hurt themselves,
right,
and that they know that they're loved right where they are.
And I just want to say, as a closing comment, what we believe about the gospel and about a theological framework for sexuality and humanity in general, what it tells us is all of us are broken. The only question is, in what way does that brokenness in our lives come out? And what we want you to know is if you are struggling with that, you're feeling that. Maybe you even are getting mad at me for saying it's a struggle right now. You're like, it's not a struggle for me. It's who I am. If that's where you are, we want you to understand that we don't think this is some kind of thing that ostracizes you or pushes you away. All of us are dealing with feelings and emotions that are misplaced. And we want you to know that this is a church that loves you, that cares about you because Christ Jesus died for you. The life that we're calling you to biblically is not something we're trying to beat you over the head with a hammer, or we're trying to beat you over the head with our Bibles. We really do want you to know that there's a love and compassion and a care, and this is a place where you can find that, and why the truth of the gospel and the truth of biblical sexuality is not just what's right for you. We really, really believe these things strongly because it's what's best for you. We believe we function best. We operate according to God's design for sexuality.